Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Curtis, and today I'm going to review episode 1 of season 1 of The Sandman. The episode starts off with Morpheus explaining the differences between the real world and the dream world. Morpheus describes the real world as being boring and stressful, while the dream world is more fun, adventurous, and is something that ultimately affects the real world. Morpheus also explains that the dream world is his realm and that he is the king of dreams and nightmares. And during his narration, we actually see a man sleeping in the back of a car as a raven flies by. The raven continues to fly through what appears to be multiple universes, even crossing paths with the dragon, before entering what Morpheus describes as his realm. Morpheus goes on to say that when the waking world leaves you wanting and weary, sleep brings you here to find freedom, an adventure to face your fears and fantasies, and dreams and nightmares that I create and which I must control, lest they consume and destroy you. That is my purpose and my function. Morpheus then states that it was his purpose until he left his kingdom to pursue a nightmare, and then a raven lands on his shoulder and he picks up his hymn. Lucienne walks towards him and asks him if he will return, and the reason why she asks him this question is because dreams, which is also Morpheus's nickname, rarely survives in the waking world opposed to nightmares, which are able to thrive and be successful in the waking world. Morpheus puts his hymns on. He grabs some sand from a pouch, he pours it on the ground, and actually goes into the air, and then he's able to teleport away. The scene then switches back to the man in the car who wakes up just as he arrives at Falling Rig. He grabs his bag, gets out of the car, and walks towards the building where he's greeted by a kid. He tells the kid that his name is Dr. John Hathaway of the Royal Museum. The kid asks him if he is there to see Magus. He tells him that he is actually there to see Roderick Burgess. The kid lets him in and tells him that his father likes to be called Magus because it is another name for a sorcerer. He goes inside the building and starts to hear and see some strange things. Ruthven comes into the hallway and tells John that Magus will see him in his study. Magus' son asks him if he is there to join his father's Order of Ancient Mysteries. Magus comes out before he can answer and tells his son, who we find out is named Alex, to go and get them some tea. John tells Magus that his son Destroyer was actually sunk the previous week near Jutland. Magus offers his condolences and let him know that one of his sons passed away as well. John is confused because he thought that Magus only had one son, which appears to upset Alex, who walks away in sadness. Magus asks him if he brought the Magdalene Grimoire with him. If I mispronounced that, I do apologize. John pulls out a book and begins to ask him a question, but Magus answers before he can get it out. He tells him that he will be able to capture the Angel of Death. Magus tells him that he plans to use the spells inside the books to bring his sons back to life. Next, we see Magus and Ruthven leading a group of hooded people into another room. John appears to be unsure what is going on, but Alice tells him that everything will be okay, and they join the group, who goes into another area of the building. Magus tells the group that he will not only summon death, but he will imprison death. While this is happening, the scene actually switches over, and we actually see someone stabbing someone in front of a car. And then Morpheus actually appears and confronts this person. We find out that the person's name is Corinthian. And he basically tells Corinthian that you should not be killing people for pleasure. This is not what you're here for. Corinthian attempts to explain himself, but Morpheus is not really trying to hear it. And he's actually able to turn his knife into sand. Corinthian begs for mercy, but at this point Morpheus grabs his ruby and he puts it in front of Corinthian's face. And I thought that he was going to kill Corinthian, or I thought he was going to take some power from him, take his soul, but it doesn't appear that he did that. He backs away, he teleports, and then Corinthian gets up and just smiles. So that part did confuse me. Back in the building, Magus is attempting to summon death, even going as far as to cut himself. He drops a feather on the ground, and the feather actually begins to float in the air. The people begin to chant, "Here is darkness," and Morpheus appears on the ground. It's like a Harry Potter movie, like he's floating in the air, then he just appears on the ground. Magus calls Alex over to get the pouch and a jewel from Morpheus. And then at this point, Morpheus' cloak and a raven attempts to attack him, but is unsuccessful. And then Magus takes the helm off, tells the guard to watch him, and then leaves the room. It is at this time that we see the impact of Morpheus being in prison. People are now suffering from what they call sleepy sickness, where they're not able to wake up from their dreams. In the next scene, Corinthian shows up to Magus' house and gives him insight about Morpheus. He tells him that Morpheus is part of the family of death and that Morpheus can enter into people's dreams if they are close by. He tells them that they need to build some kind of barrier to prevent him from being able to escape, and also tells them about the power that the ruby, sand, and him hold. Magus does not understand why he is trying to help him. He tells him that he's trying to help him because he fears that Morpheus will take everything away from him. He is getting ready to say something else, but stops because he feels like they are being watched. He picks up a rock, throws it at a nearby tree, and the raven that attempted to attack Magus a little bit earlier flies away. Magus and Alice go into the room where Morpheus is, and Magus lets him know that he knows that he is the dream of Endless. He goes on to tell him that he did not actually intend to capture him, and that he actually intended to capture Death, so he could bring his sons back. He tells him that if he is able to bring his sons back alive and healthy, that he will release him. He doesn't get an answer. Magus wants to know, what he can get in exchange for letting him go. But Morpheus, again, refuses to speak. Magus tells him that he will remain in prison and that he will hold on to the ruby. Alex begins to cry before running out of the room. And I will say at this part, I felt like Alex and Morpheus, they had some kind of connection. I'm not really sure. The episode then flashes forward 10 years later into the future, and we hear Morpheus talking about the ruby, sand, realm, and how it brought youth and prosperity to Magus and the people around him, but not to others. Alex is reading a newspaper that is talking about the sleepy sickness, so that is still going on 10 years later, and how people have warped minds and broken bones. He is interrupted by Rufin, who tells him that he is supposed to be working, not reading, and hands him a bunch of coats. He places the coats on the chair, then he goes outside, and we see a large crowd waiting. And he actually tells them that, unfortunately, they are full right now, so they can't get in. And this actually causes the people in the crowd to get upset. They get irate. And they start to question him, like, who are you to speak for Magus? Like, who are you? And then we see this woman appear. And she's like, do you know who he is? That's actually Magus' son. And he actually knows how to do magic. And it's like, are you sure you want to mess with him? Because, he may be able to do some tricks. And it's at this point that the guys, they actually back off and they actually leave. And, he thanks her because he wouldn't have been able to handle that situation clearly. And she was like, you know what? It's nothing. You have more power than you think. And then she asks him if he can bring her in so she can meet Vegas. The episode then flashes to what appears to be the next day. Alex begins cleaning up a stall once he hears two men talking about watching Morpheus. It appears that the people who are supposed to watch him are late. Alex tells them that he will watch Morpheus until the guys get back. The men agree, they leave, and then Alex goes into the room with Morpheus. He introduces himself and asks Morpheus if he's doing okay. He apologizes for everything that has happened and tells him that his father is actually a good man and he only wants to see his son again. Alex tells him that he will let him go if he's able to bring his brother back, or if he would at least talk to his father. And at this point, it appears that Morpheus was actually coming around to it, like maybe he was getting ready to speak. But then, we hear Magus, and he's been listening the entire time, and he is upset. Magus drags Alex out of the room and throws him to the ground. He asks him if Morpheus spoke to him. He says he did not. And then Magus goes on to tell him, we cannot just release him, like it will be dangerous. Do you understand the impact of everything that would happen? And while he is, going off on Alex, he actually looks over and he notices the Raven from earlier in the episode. And so he grabs his gun and he tells Alex that he's actually been trying to shoot that bird for 10 years. And then the woman from the previous night actually comes in. And so clearly they were fucking. And she comes out and she walks towards him. And then Magus hands the gun to Alex and says that he wants Alex to shoot the Raven. And then he walks away. And then the woman, who we find out her name is Ethel, she ends up walking away with him. Alex goes outside with the gun, and we see the Raven flying around the property before eventually landing on the banister inside of the house. It appears that Morpheus and the Raven are able to connect, and the Raven attempts to fly to him, but has to land in the nearby room to avoid being seen by Magus. Magus is completely oblivious and lights a cigar with the match. The Raven notices that how he was able to light the match, and so the Raven waits for him to leave, and then, this part was kind of strange to me, but the Raven grabs the match, is able to spark a fire, and then is able to place it on some papers, which causes, the papers and I believe the couch to catch on fire. And this is able to distract people long enough for the Raven to fly into the room where Morpheus is. And so the Raven is trying his best to try to get Morpheus out of this glass contraption. But unfortunately, the Raven is stopped because Alex is able to catch up to it and is able to shoot and kill the Raven in front of the glass and actually almost destroys the glass. The episode then flashes to the hospital where we see people who are affected by the sleepy sickness, and it appears that while some people are stuck in a state of sleep, there are other people who actually cannot go to sleep at all. After this, Alex goes outside and he begins reading the book when someone approaches him. The person asks him what is he doing, and of course he says, I'm reading the book. This guy ends up helping him up, and Alex begins to gaze into the guy's eyes, but then he stops once he hears the sound of glass breaking. He goes inside the house and he hears Ethel crying, and it's at this point that we find out that Ethel is pregnant, and we also find out that Magus wants her to abort the baby. And not only that, Magus actually called a doctor to come over to help abort the baby, and I was just like, damn, Magus, it's like that? And so after they have like a small little conversation as far as Alex and Ethel, she actually ends up leaving in the middle of the night. And when she leaves, she has a very large suitcase. And we end up finding out that she took the ruby, the hem, the sand, and she also took $200,000. Magus goes into the room where Morpheus is being held and reveals to him that Ethel took his sand, ruby, and hem. He tells him that he is willing to let him go if he can promise to go after her, and also promise to give him wealth, youth, and immortality. Morpheus does not respond to him, and this actually makes Magus really mad to the point that he picks up his cane and actually starts hitting the glass material with the cane. Alex attempts to calm him down, but it does not work, and Magus actually starts swinging the cane towards Alex, and he brings up his son Randall. And it's at this point that Alex says, you know what, if Randall was still alive, he would actually hate you just as much as I do. And then the two of them actually start struggling over the cane, and this actually causes Magus to go back into the glass, and he actually ends up hitting his head on the glass really hard. We can see that there's some blood forming, and then he collapses, and then he really just starts to bleed out. And then he looks over at Morpheus and tells him that he is never getting out, and then he ends up, unfortunately, bleeding to death. And at this point, Alex is not necessarily focused on his father. He's actually focused more on Morpheus. And the two of them, they actually start looking at each other, and Morpheus actually stands up and extends his hand towards Alex. And Alex, he considers extending his hand as well, but then he starts to remember some of the things that his father said about the dangers of Morpheus, and so he decides not to. After this scene, we actually see Alex is outside, and the person that he was speaking to a little bit earlier when he was reading the book actually walks up towards him and asks him if he's okay. And then he actually sits down next to him, tell him, sorry for your loss, offers condolences, and then they start to hold hands, and Alex actually starts to smile. And then the episode actually flashes forward 9 months later, and we see Ethel and her baby, and we also see that she still has the helm. The scene then flashes back to the house, and Alex brings the guy that he was holding hands with into the room where Morpheus is. And it's at this point that we learn that Alex's friend's name is Paul. Alex offers to let Morpheus out if he promises not to hurt them, as far as him and Paul. Alex wants Morpheus to talk to him, but he refuses. Paul tells Alex that he needs to prove to Morpheus that he can trust him and that he means what he says. Alex tells him that he does mean everything that he says, but he cannot let him out unless he promises not to hurt him or Paul. And I think it's very important to note that there are other people in the room, so they are completely disregarding the others and just saying, as long as you promise not to hurt me, it's fine. But for the other people, it really doesn't matter. I thought that was kind of messed up. The episode then flashes forward again. This time it's decades later, and we see an older Alex is still trying to plead with Morpheus. And so Alex is much older, but Morpheus is still the same as he was before, so he has not aged. And then we see Paul, and Paul actually calls him darling, so clearly Alex and Paul are in a relationship. And Paul is basically like, please, just let it go. And he brings the wheelchair, like, please just get into the wheelchair and let's go. And Alex actually says, you know what, fine. He gets into the wheelchair, and then he looks over at Morpheus and tells him that this is the last time that he's coming. He's not coming down anymore, right? But as they are leaving, and this part kind of threw me off, I wasn't really sure, but as they were leaving, the wheel on the wheelchair actually is scuffed up the markings around the glass. And when that happened, Paul looked down at the markings, looked up at Morpheus, and then continued walking away. So I'm not sure if he did that on purpose. Maybe he was tired of seeing his man constantly pleading with this person to try to give him some information. He did it on purpose. I'm not really sure, but that scene was a little bit weird. But after this, we notice that there are two security guards there. And they're talking, and then one of them says that they have plans to go to the beach soon. That one ends up yawning and then ends up falling asleep. The scene then switches to a dream sequence, and we see the security guard on the beach. And then we see that there are a couple of people who were walking up to him before vanishing. The security guard then gets up, starts walking around the beach, trying to figure out what's going on. But when he turns around, he's actually face to face with Morpheus. And of course, he's afraid, he's scared, so he pulls his gun out and he starts to shoot at him, right? But then the scene quickly switches back to where we were before, and we see that the security guard is actually shooting at the glass. So instead of him shooting at Morpheus in the dream, he's actually shooting at the glass. It causes the glass to shatter, and Morpheus is able to escape. Alex hears the commotion and starts to walk through the house to see what's going on. And I thought this scene was kind of cool because he actually transformed into his younger self. So he goes back to his late teen or early 20s version of himself. And he goes upstairs and he's actually face to face with Morpheus. And at this point, he actually transforms into his younger self that we saw at the beginning of the episode. And I thought that was kind of cool. And, he's trying to plead his case with Morpheus, but Morpheus is not having it. And he tells him that he's going to give him the gift of eternal sleep. And then we switch back to an older version of himself. He's in the bed. We see Paul. He's upset. He's playing like, oh my God, what's going on? And then we see a nurse. And of course, we find out that now he has a sleepy sickness as well. Next, we see Corinthian inside of a dark room. He has blood dripping down his face near his eye. I was like, what is going on? And it's at this point that we find out that Corinthian is aware that Morpheus escaped. So I guess they had some type of connection and he was able to figure that out. He gets up and he walks over to a man that is sitting down and tells him, like, I got to leave. And then he turns around and we see the man. And the man, he doesn't have on a shirt. So I'm going to assume that those two, maybe they were getting ready to do something. Maybe they already did something. But the guy, he doesn't have on a shirt on. But he also doesn't have any eyes. So it appears that Corinthian actually stole his eyes. And I was like, oh, man, that was crazy. In the last scene, we see Lucienne running through a field and she finds Morpheus laying on the ground. She helps him up and they walk towards the large gates near the rim. He places his hand on the gates and they begin to open. As the gates are opening, Lucienne tells him that the rim is not what it once was. The gates open and we see that the rim is completely destroyed. She tells him that the rim is based on him and what he has going on, and that essentially the rim has crumbled and rotted away due to him being away so long. And she also tells him that some of the palace staff went looking for him, but others decided to leave because they thought that he abandoned them. He tells him that he cannot have him in the waking world, so he plans to bring him back to the realm. And that is where the episode ends. I would like to thank everyone for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. If you could, please like, comment, subscribe. That would be great. My goal is to review the full season 1 before season 2 begins. If I'm not able to finish the reviews for season 1, that is okay, because I am going to review season 2, the full season, and so I will get to it. Once again, I really do appreciate everybody watching. You all have a great rest of your day. Bye.